Okay, so have you heard about Indigo Children? You know, those kids who just seem, well, a little bit different,
Different how?
like wise beyond their years, or maybe they have these kind of, I don't know, almost supernatural abilities.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, it's definitely an intriguing idea. Lots of buzz around it.
Exactly. So we're going to do a deep dive into it, see what we can find in all these sources we've got. Articles, firsthand accounts, even some skeptical takes from, like, psychologists.
Sounds fascinating. Where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, I think the best place to start is with the term itself, indigo child. And get this, it wasn't coined by a doctor or a scientist or anything.
Oh, who came up with it then?
A synesthete, actually. Nancy Ann Tapp.
Synesthesia. Isn't that where, like, one sense triggers an experience in another? Like seeing sounds or tasting colors?
Yeah, exactly. So Tappy, back in the late 60s, early 70s, she claimed she started seeing indigo auras around certain children.
Indigo auras. And she thought this meant something.
Oh, yeah, she was convinced it meant these kids were like a new generation, special abilities, a purpose.
That's pretty interesting. And this was all happening when the New Age movement was gaining popularity, right?
Right. All that stuff about, Eastern spirituality, personal transformation, kind of a blend of beliefs.
Makes sense then that Tappy's ideas would resonate with people who are into that kind of thing.
Totally. But what about these indigo children? What were they supposed to be like?
Well, according to what I've seen, they were often described as strong-willed, independent, highly intuitive.
Yeah, and some sources even said they were like, incredibly empathetic, almost like they could feel other people's emotions, right?
Right, exactly. And they were often seen as super creative, intelligent, driven by a strong sense of purpose.
Almost like they have this internal compass guiding them.
You know, it's interesting, though, some of these traits, they kind of overlap with characteristics associated with ADHD or autism.
Oh, for sure. Like a kid who's easily distracted or has trouble following rules, some people might jump to, oh, they're an indigo child. But maybe it's something else entirely.
Exactly. And that's where things can get tricky, right? Because if a parent is convinced their child is an indigo child, they might resist seeking professional help.
Oh, totally. Thinking it's part of their specialness or whatever.
Okay.
But it could be something that needs, actual medical attention.
Exactly. And that's where the potential harm comes in. Missing a diagnosis could mean that child doesn't get the support they need.
Right, right. So it's a delicate balance,
Yeah.
celebrating a child's unique qualities, but also recognizing when those qualities might be masking something else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about meeting each child where they are, understanding their individual needs. Sometimes that means looking beyond those labels and seeking guidance from professionals.
Okay, so not just celebrating those unique qualities, but understanding them, making sure they're getting the right support. But some proponents, they went even further with this indigo child idea, right?
Oh yeah, they started categorizing them. Different types of indigo children, each with its own strengths, areas of focus.
Like what? What were these different types?
Well, there were four main types: humanists, artists, conceptualists, and catalysts.
Okay, break those down for me. I'm curious.
All right, so humanists, they're all about people and connection. Caregivers, wanting to make the world a better place. Then you've got artists, pretty self-explanatory, drawn to creative pursuits, art, music, whatever.
Makes sense. What about the other two?
Conceptualists, they're the big thinkers, love to tinker, innovate, drawn to science, technology, figuring out how things work. And lastly, you've got catalysts, challenging the status quo, inspiring others to think differently.
Oh, so like the change makers, the visionaries.
Exactly. Pushing boundaries, not afraid to question things. It's intriguing to consider how these types might actually just reflect the different ways human potential can show up.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, we all have our own unique blend of strengths and talents. It's not like we fit neatly into these boxes.
Right, exactly. And while it's fun to think about, we have to remember, not everyone's buying into this whole indigo child idea. In fact, there's a lot of skepticism, a lot of criticism surrounding it.
Oh, I bet. Like, what are some of the criticisms?
Well, for starters, there's the whole issue of scientific evidence, or the lack thereof. Many psychologists and medical professionals, they just see these indigo traits as normal childhood behavior.
Or, like we talked about before, maybe signs of something else, like ADHD or autism.
Exactly. And they worry that this whole indigo label might actually deter parents from seeking proper medical help.
Right, right. Like, instead of getting their kid the help they need, they're just like, oh, they're just an indigo child, it's fine.
Exactly. And that can have real consequences.
Okay, so the lack of scientific evidence is one thing. What else are folks saying?
Well, there's also the concern that parents might misinterpret challenging behavior as, a sign of their child's specialness.
So, like, instead of addressing a real issue, they're just chalking it up to their kid being an indigo.
Right, and that can be really detrimental to a child's well-being.
Yeah.
They might not get the support they need to actually thrive.
Okay, so we've got the lack of scientific evidence, the
Mhm.
potential for misdiagnosis, the possibility of parents misinterpreting things. It sounds like there are some pretty valid criticism.
Oh, definitely. It's important to approach this whole concept with a critical eye, not just blindly believing everything you hear.
So how do we navigate this then? How do we approach this concept without falling into the trap of either, blindly believing or completely dismissing it?
I think it comes down to critical thinking. We need to look at the evidence, weigh the different perspectives, but also not lose sight of the importance of scientific rigor.
Right, especially when it comes to kids' health and well-being.
Exactly. It's not just about accepting everything we hear at face value. We need to question things, be skeptical, but also be open to the possibility that there might be something more to learn.
Yeah, it's like finding that sweet spot, right? Where we're not shutting down ideas completely, but we're also not just blindly accepting them.
Exactly. It's about striking that balance, and I think that's what makes this whole deep dive so interesting, right?
Totally. Because it's not just about dissecting a belief system. It's about trying to understand its appeal, its cultural significance, and what it might reveal about us as humans.
I like that. It's like we're peeling back the layers of this cultural artifact,
Yeah.
trying to understand its origins, its meaning, its impact.
And in this case, the impact is on how we view children, right? What we believe about their potential, their abilities.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. It touches on some pretty fundamental questions about what it means to be human, about our potential, our purpose, even the nature of consciousness.
Okay, that got deep fast.
It's heavy stuff, but also super intriguing.
I agree. And I have a feeling we've only just scratched the surface.
Well, then let's keep diving.
So we've talked about the origins of this whole indigo child idea, the traits, the types, even the criticisms. But there's something else I keep thinking about, this idea of like a potential link between this indigo child phenomenon and societal anxieties.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Like, this concept really took off in the late 90s, early 2000s, right? A time of, what, rapid technological advancement, globalization, lots of uncertainty about the future, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like Y2K, the dot-com bubble, all that.
Yeah.
Maybe people were looking for something to hold on to, some sense that things were going to be okay.
It's possible. Maybe this idea of a new generation with, like, exceptional abilities, a mission to change the world. Maybe that offered a sense of hope.
Yeah.
Way to make sense of all the craziness.
Right. Like, amidst all this change and uncertainty, here come these indigo children, ready to guide us toward a brighter future. It's a pretty compelling narrative.
It is. And it might have been especially appealing to folks who were feeling disillusioned with, I don't know, traditional systems, institutions. Maybe they were looking for alternative explanations, different ways of understanding the world.
Okay, so we've got this backdrop of societal change, this yearning for something better. But let's not forget about the skeptics, right? They raised some valid points. We talked about the lack of scientific evidence, but what else? What are some other concerns beyond just the science?
Well, one of the main criticisms is the potential for harm. We touched on this earlier, the idea that mislabeling a child as an indigo could lead to missed diagnoses.
Right, like maybe they actually have ADHD or autism or some other neurodevelopmental difference, but instead of getting the right help, they're just labeled as this, special indigo child.
Exactly. And that can have real consequences. Missing out on early intervention can make a huge difference in a child's development.
Totally. So it's not just about, being open-minded. It's about being responsible, making sure kids are getting the help they need.
Right. And beyond that, there's also the concern that this indigo label could create unrealistic expectations for kids.
Like they're constantly being told they're special, destined for greatness, that they have to, save the world or something.
Exactly. Imagine that pressure. What if they don't live up to those expectations? What if they don't feel like they're special or gifted?
Yeah, that could really mess with a kid's self-esteem.
Absolutely. And for kids who are already struggling with social or emotional challenges, that pressure could be incredibly damaging.
So it's a delicate balance, right? We want to celebrate every child's unique qualities, but we also don't want to burden them with labels or expectations that might not be realistic.
I agree. It's about recognizing their individuality, providing support, but also allowing them to just be kids, to explore, to discover, to figure things out at their own pace.
Okay, so we've talked about the skepticism, the potential downsides. But even if we set aside the whole question of whether indigo children actually exist, there's no denying this concept has had a pretty big cultural impact.
Oh, for sure. It's everywhere. Books, movies, parenting, blogs, you name it.
Yeah.
It's even seeped into mainstream consciousness. Like now, any kid who's a little bit different, a little bit sensitive, they might get labeled as an indigo.
Right, it's become this catch-all term for like any child who seems to possess some kind of exceptional quality or awareness.
Exactly. And it's interesting, right? Even though the scientific community doesn't really buy into it, the cultural impact is undeniable.
So why do you think that is? Why is this idea so sticky? Why does it resonate with so many people, even if there's no real evidence to support it?
Well, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that yearning for meaning, for purpose, this idea that humanity's evolving, becoming more enlightened, more spiritually aware. It's a powerful narrative.
And maybe these indigo children represent that evolution, they embody that hope for a better future.
Exactly. And in times of uncertainty and change, which, let's face it, we're kind of always in, that kind of hope can be really appealing.
So it's not just about the children themselves, it's about what they represent, what they symbolize for the future of humanity.
I think you're right. It's like a projection of our own hopes and anxieties onto this new generation.
Okay, so we've got the cultural impact, but what about the psychological implications? How does believing in this concept affect parents and their relationships with their kids?
That's a really good question. On the one hand, you could argue that believing your child is an indigo child might lead to like a deeper appreciation for their unique qualities. Being more attuned to their sensitivities, encouraging their creativity, that kind of thing.
So like you're more aware of their specialness, more willing to nurture their individuality?
Yeah, exactly. But on the other hand, there's the potential for this belief to lead to like unrealistic expectations. Seeing your child as this extraordinary being with a predetermined destiny.
Right, instead of seeing them as just a kid with their own unique needs and challenges.
Exactly. And that can create a lot of pressure, for both the parent and the child.
So it's like, even if the intentions are good, this belief could actually create some challenges in the parent-child relationship.
It's definitely something to be mindful of. And it highlights the importance of, approaching this whole concept with a healthy dose of reality. Seeing our kids for who they are, not who we want them to be or who we think they should be.
Right, recognizing that every child is unique with their own path to follow.
Exactly. And as parents, our job is to support them on that path, to provide love and guidance, but also to let them figure things out for themselves.
Okay, so we've covered a lot in this part of our deep dive. Societal anxieties, the concerns of the skeptics, even the psychological implications for families. But there's still more to explore, right?
Definitely. We've only just begun to unpack all the layers of this fascinating and complex topic.
All right, so we've journeyed through this whole indigo child phenomenon pretty thoroughly, haven't we?
We really have. Origins, characteristics, those types they talk about, lack of scientific backing, all of it, even the potential for harm and those societal anxieties that might be feeding into it.
Right, right. Cultural impact, the psychology of it all. We didn't shy away from anything.
Nope, we dove deep. But now I think it's time to zoom out a bit, look at the bigger picture.
Totally agree. So what can we take away from all this? What have we learned, and how can we apply that to, our own lives, our understanding of the world?
That's the key question, isn't it? And one big takeaway, I'd say, is the absolute importance of critical thinking. Especially when you encounter ideas that seem, well, a little out there, challenging the conventional wisdom.
Yeah, it's easy to get swept up in those narratives, especially when they sound, I don't know, exciting or hopeful.
Exactly. But we can't just accept everything we hear, right? We've got to pause, question those assumptions, look for evidence. That's critical thinking in a nutshell.
Right, but it's not about being totally closed off either, right? You don't want to dismiss things outright just because they sound a little strange.
Absolutely not. It's about finding that balance. Being curious, exploring new ideas, but also maintaining that healthy dose of skepticism.
Like, okay, I'm listening, I'm open, but show me the proof?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And honestly, that applies to anything, not just indigo children. Any belief system, political ideology, even a hot new trend. We've got to be able to evaluate information, consider different sides, form our own informed opinions. That's how we navigate this crazy world.
Couldn't agree more. Critical thinking. It's a lifelong skill, something we can always work on. So, what else? Any other big takeaways from our Indigo deep dive?
Well, one thing that really stood out to me was just how important it is to recognize that every single child is unique. with their own strengths, talents, challenges, the whole package.
Right, right. Labels, categories, they can be helpful sometimes, but they can also be limiting.
Exactly. Whether you believe in this whole indigo child thing or not, the key is to approach each child as an individual. Meet them where they are, honor their journey, give them what they need to truly flourish.
That means paying attention, really listening, observing, right? Recognizing their sensitivities, celebrating their individuality.
Absolutely. And it also means acknowledging that we all have biases. We all make assumptions. Being aware of that helps us see children more clearly, for who they truly are.
I like that. Seeing them for who they are, not who we want them to be or who we think they should be, just letting them be themselves.
Exactly. And, even if the science doesn't support the whole indigo child concept, I think it does serve as a reminder that all children have so much potential, so much to offer the world.
It's like a wake-up call, right? To really see the wonder, the creativity, the unique spark in each and every child.
Precisely. And to nurture that spark. Yeah. To create environments where kids feel safe to explore, to experiment, to be themselves.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think I'm left with a mix of feelings, a little bit of caution, about labels and expectations, but also a lot of hope. Hope for the future, hope for humanity, and hope for all the amazing children who are out there making their mark on the world.
Well said. It's about finding that balance,
Yeah.
right? Recognizing the complexity, appreciating the individuality, and holding on to that hope, that belief in the potential of every child. And maybe, just maybe, if we can do that, if we can create a world that truly values and nurtures that potential, well, then this whole idea of indigo children becomes kind of irrelevant, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? Because every child would be recognized for the incredible, unique being that they are. And that's a beautiful thought to end on, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even in exploring these, let's call them unconventional ideas, we can still find valuable insights, things that can help us better understand ourselves and the world around us.
Couldn't agree more. So to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of indigo children. We hope it sparks some curiosity, some reflection, maybe even a little bit of awe at the amazing potential that exists within every child.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.